Hey, I'm Jesse. Let's have a devotion. March 14th, 2021, a group of people gathered in the AMC Theater, Factoria 8 in Washington. And the very first verse that was preached from the Redemption Church pulpit was John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. It's a good place to begin, right? The beginning makes sense. Get it? And so in the beginning was the Word seems like a great foundation for a church. Contextually, the Gospel of John also was chosen strategically because of the lostness of Seattle. This is the most atheistic city in the U.S., and we're not a heavily Jewish population. There's a strong Jewish presence here compared to other cities, but the overwhelming vast majority of the people here would be considered Gentiles. John's gospel was written specifically so that Gentiles, and Jews can also obviously be converted by it, but the original intent was so that you would read John, believe, and have life in his name. It's the gospel that's written to convert Gentiles, and it still does that today. Now, again, that's not to say the Jewish person wouldn't read John and be saved. I'm sure there are tons of formerly Orthodox Jewish people who that's their story, just like the Gospel of Matthew was actually written to a Jewish audience, and there are Gentiles that are saved every day as the Holy Spirit illuminates the words, the Gospel of Matthew to them. Matthew begins his gospel with this gematria, sort of an artistic genealogy. It's not an exhaustive genealogy, but it's intended to show the lineage from Abraham to Jesus, because lineage traces your roots as a Jewish family back to the promised land. Lineage shows your bona fides as a part of the chosen nation of God. And so lineage from Abraham to Jesus begins establishing credibility in a Jewish sense. It's why a lot of Gentile readers might not get why there's this long list of names. They might even skip it. What's funny is that John begins his gospel in a similarly contextualized way. Alexander the Great had conquered the known world. He was taught by the fathers of Greek philosophy. And what was missing from Aristotle's worldview was this authoritative basis for truth itself, for right and for wrong. To Aristotle's credit, he acknowledged that he existed in a universe that was governed by laws, and he could not quite put his finger on the authority's origins. And so the term that he used was the logos. He had not yet found the logos. Aristotle was still seeking the logos the day that he died. That philosophy was passed on to Alexander the Great. And as Alexander the Great conquered much of the known world, that conspicuous vacuum in the presuppositions of Hellenistic Greek philosophy went with it, and likewise infected vast populations, longing for the Logos, looking for the Logos, seeking the Logos. The Greek word logos, when translated to English, is word. This is why the word word is capitalized. Now, if you're a longstanding member of the Redemption Church, I'm going to remind you of a story. And it's a really good one because I learned a lot from that moment. I used to, when teaching the Gospel of John, kind of skip the first 10 verses because they didn't really make sense to me because I didn't really understand this contextual background to John. Early on, like when I was in college, I was sharing the gospel with somebody. I wanted to share from John because I wanted to get to John 3:16. Because as a little kid growing up in the 90s, like there are John 3:16 billboards all over the South. And I was like, okay, well, that's the verse that you use to share the gospel with people. Let's just get to that as fast as we can. And it wasn't until I understood why it begins the way that it does that I saw how vital it is actually to begin with these opening 10 verses. There was a guy who had given himself wholeheartedly to originally the Church of Satan, which, by the way, is actually atheistic in Anton LaVey's intent. Certainly been used by the devil, but at least it portended that it was atheistic, secular humanist gathering that wanted tax-exempt status for their quote-unquote church. And then he found himself wholly devout to objectivism, which is the atheistic moral philosophy attempt, is what I'll call it, by Ayn Rand. Ayn Rand is famous for Atlas Shrugged. She also wrote The Virtue of Selfishness. Yes, that's a real book. It's so funny. I've seen the look on the faces of atheists when I've talked about that book, which I've read. It was given to me by this former atheist friend of mine. We were exchanging reading assignments. So many of them don't realize that that's a real book, and it's not ironic. And she really wrote it. I can see the look on their faces when they don't realize it, and they pull out their phones, and they're like, like, it's real, it's true. She wrote The Fountainhead. But this philosophy of hers was objectivism. She was basically giving a redux version of Aristotelian philosophy. And the same conspicuous vacuum that infected Aristotelianism infected objectivism. There's no logos. It's missing the word. It's given with just the authority of Ayn Rand herself. And who is she to say what is objectively morally right or wrong, especially when she cannot account for the origins of morality? So when we exchanged reading assignments, he gave me The Virtue of Selfishness, and he gave me the Satanic Bible. I gave him the Gospel of John. First, we read the Satanic Bible, and we discussed it. Then we went to the Gospel of John. And just like 6 words in the beginning was the Word. Is that 6? Let me see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yep. 6 words in, he stopped and he cursed. And he's like, why is Word capitalized? Have I found the Logos? Is Jesus the Logos? And I said, yeah, you found the Logos. And then he cursed again. He gave his life to Jesus. I flew out with a film crew just to let him tell his story at the Museum of the Bible, where he would sometimes go after our regular phone calls, continuing to the Gospel of John, and he would find these artifacts and send me pictures of things that he found that lined up with what we were studying in the Bible. It was really, really cool. It was really exciting. But it really began with this. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So the tension here speaks to the hypostatic union of the Trinity, and that the Father and the Son are one. See, even continuing into the Gospel of John, into the 16th and 17th chapters. And see also the fact that they are separate entities in themselves, in that the Father will know things that the Son does not. For example, Jesus would say outrightly that the timing of the second coming is known only by the Father and not by the Son. And so they're distinct in nature, and yet they are unified, just along co-equal with the Holy Spirit. And so John is meeting his readers right where they were. And what he presents is sort of a new Genesis. Look at how Genesis begins. This is the very first words of the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, I'll exposit that verse all day, because what we see is the beginnings of beginnings themselves. We see the introduction of the concept of time and the creation of the heavens and the earth. The fact that there's an S right here, man, that's a tempting rabbit hole to go down. But I want to focus on John this week. Here in Genesis 1:1, we begin at the beginning, and then John begins in the beginning. The first words are in the beginning and in the beginning. So they align perfectly. You can see what John is doing. He's meeting his Hellenistic readers right where they are. Everyone since Aristotle and Alexander the Great and all of the nations that he'd conquered and who had believed in his philosophies were all seeking the Logos. And John, in the Jesse Campbell translation, says, I got your Logos right over here. This formerly skeptical friend of mine, now a member of a church in Washington, D.C., said, and I quote, "Jesus is the truth with a capital T." I thought that was beautiful. He's exactly right. The personification of truth. When we first introduced this at the Redemption Church, the way that I presented it was that Jesus is primordial logic personified. Do you see the parallels between the words logos and logic? There's a reason for that. When atheism critiques Christianity, it will do so by really ironically bragging about a disbelief in physically impossible things. I don't believe that a man can walk on water. I don't believe that snakes can talk. And they'll just sort of pick on miracles that the Bible states are miraculous. It's partly why they're included in the Bible, because they're so remarkable and miraculous. And they'll use these miracles in the Bible, overlooking, by the way, the reason that the miracles happen, which to me is far more significant than the breaches of God's own laws of physics, which he authored and as is his prerogative to breach. They overlook why, for example, the flood, and will pick on the minutia of the volume of water required and the dimensions of the ark and things like this. And none of that matters. What matters way more is that, you're missing the whole point. God poured out his wrath on mankind, but he saved some. That matters infinitely more than the dimensions of the ark, frankly. The dimensions of the ark are spelled out in the text, right? And there's another rabbit hole I could go down here about the length of Noah's fathoms versus a modern day man's fathoms. But anyway, the point is God poured out his wrath, but he saved some. When atheists, skeptics, especially militant anti-Christian atheists, just say I don't believe in this miracle, I don't believe in this miracle, I don't believe in this miracle. And what they'll try to do is reduce all of Christianity down to a singular miracle. And they don't really make an argument. They just express incredulity, which doesn't impress me. It doesn't prove that the miracle didn't happen. It proves that it's miraculous in nature. And the bigger purpose is why that particular miracle. And so atheists who believe that the entire universe self-generated and that life sprang from abiogenesis, and that morality really might be an adaptive herd trait from evolution, claim to be logical, and that Christians are illogical. And what's so funny is that they are, in the truest sense of the word, etymologically, illogical because they have no logos, whereas we do. His name is Jesus. He is primordial, as in before life began, logic, the logos, the word, personified. He is fully God and fully man. Like my former Satanist, former objectivist friend said, the truth with a capital T. So what Christianity posits is that logic was with God, and he is one with God. We have the most logical worldview in the world because it begins, see this right here in the beginning, with logic. Atheism begins with the most colossal abortion of logic fathomable. At first there is nothing, and then ex nihilo, everything. That's the greatest anathema to logic I can possibly fathom. And of the number of formerly militant atheists whom I've seen come to faith in Christ, they all admit that deep down they secretly believed, and they were haunted by things like abiogenesis. You know, that I gotta be real here. Life doesn't come from non-life. And the origins of matter, ex nihilo, the only way that things could exist. as if an uncreated creator created it all. This is consistent with Romans chapter 1. God's divine power and eternal nature are clearly seen from everything that he's made. And yet these now former skeptical critics of Christianity saw that obvious truth. They knew that they had no excuse, but they suppressed that truth to get away with wickedness. And so it could quite possibly be said that God doesn't believe in atheists. Deep down in the dark, they all still believe. I knew a former atheist who had a tattoo that tracked the number of supposed Christians that he thought he had dissuaded of the gospel. And he admitted that even at night he would pray. He would rally these online communities of atheists. And then at night before he fell asleep, he would pray. And today he's a Christian. This is the most logical worldview ever, because it begins with the Logos himself. In the beginning was Jesus, the Logos, the personification of primordial logic. He was with God, and he was God. So this is how logical our worldview actually is. It is the only one with the Logos. So I pray that this review of John 1 this week blesses you. Feel free to share this, because I've seen the power of the Holy Spirit when skeptics read John. Feel free to, take a page from my playbook, if that's what you want to call it. I didn't invent it. I'm sure other people have done it too. Trade reading assignments with your skeptical friends. I'll read something first that you give me, and then we'll read what I give you. And I'll read whatever they give me, because I read atheists all the time anyway. I just finished another book last night. All right, I've read virtually all of them. In fact, sometimes I find myself more engaged with those books because I spar with them as I read them. I let them express exactly what they express. I don't hate read them. Rather, I read them and then deal with their arguments. Whereas when I read, I'm even rereading C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity on audio when I drive right now. And I'm having a harder time focusing on it because I'm like, yeah, I agree. So, if this is something that you're up for, trade reading assignments, read whatever atheist book they give you, see how that actually refines your faith, and then give them a book that was written by the Holy Spirit and watch the Spirit work. Because the Holy Spirit, like we talked about in last week's devotions, is absolutely necessary in revival. You cannot have conversion without the Holy Spirit. And the Holy Spirit wrote this book. So I've seen God work. I even went so far on a couple of occasions to put it out on Facebook to offer to pay people through, I think it was Starbucks gift cards. I'll send you a Starbucks gift card if you can send me a screenshot of your phone proving that you're listening, proving to some extent, I guess, that you're listening to the audio of the Gospel of John. And people were saved. One woman described it as it felt like it was cutting to her soul. And she had not yet read the book of Hebrews. That's exactly right. It's exactly what was happening. They'll give you some repackaging of perhaps an Aristotelian idea. You will give them God's word. And the Holy Spirit is all over that. So much of my evangelistic strategy, I guess. I don't know. I can't really call it that because I didn't invent it. This is just what the Spirit has compelled me to do. But much of how I've seen God bear evangelistic fruit is just do whatever it takes to get my skeptical friends to read Scripture, particularly John. And so this is our first teaching of the Redemption Church. When you go back through the first year's teaching, you'll see these verses. And we went verse by verse, the Gospel of John, as the very first teaching of the Redemption Church. So you could say that the Redemption Church is built on the Gospel of John. My hope was that even as my hairline recedes as the years go by, you would be able to go back and you would be able to use John to disciple someone whom you're leading to Christ. And we'll talk more about that tomorrow.